Okay. All right, we are beginning. Good evening, attendees. As a reminder, all persons wishing to speak during the public comment or to an item must complete a speaker slip online by visiting the public meetings page at ebce.org prior to the start of the meeting. For those that are calling in from a landline, please email your comments to cob@ecbe.org before the meeting. All speakers must sign up before an item is called. When the chair opens the discussion to public comment, please use the raise hand feature when your name is called. The clerk will unmute your microphone when it is your turn to speak. You'll have 3 minutes to make your comment. The chair may elect to shorten the time to allow for more speakers. If you're calling in by phone, press #9 to use the raise hand feature. And with that, we can begin.
Great, thank you, Adrian. Welcome everybody to the May 18th meeting of the Community Advisory Committee of East Bay Community Energy. Really happy to see everybody here virtually. Perhaps in June we'll be able to see each other in person. I heard that we have 2 public comments, so let's go ahead and move. Oh no, actually let's do roll call first, please.
Okay, roll call. Member Eldridge?
Present.
Member French?
Present.
Member Laundrie?
Present.
Member O'Connell?
Present, I suppose, not really present, but on Zoom, yes.
Yes. Member Pacheco? No. Member Padilla?
Here.
Member Thomas?
Here.
And Chair Sutter?
Here.
Great, we have a quorum.
We have a quorum, thank you. I heard that we have 2 speakers. Anybody is invited to address the committee on anything related that's not on our current agenda. Adrian, can you let me know who our 2 speakers are, please?
Yes, hold on 1 second. We have, hold on, Blair Beekman.
Blair, okay.
Wait, hold on 1 second. Is Stephanie? Let me just check one thing. Okay. Hold on 1 second. I just need to. A lot of people have signed up at the. We have 4 speakers as far as I could tell. Blair and Alita Dupree. Hold on 1 second. I'm going to unmute Blair.
All right, so also just so people know, we'll have Blair and then who are the other 3, please?
Blair, Jessica.
Jessica.
And Alita Dupree.
Okay, so we'll go Blair, Jessica, Alita. Okay. Blair, go ahead.
All right, hold on 1 second. All right, you are unmuted.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yep, thanks.
Thank you. I have a speech, a letter actually, that after attending the Finance and Procurement meeting this past Friday, I hope it can be of interest to yourselves. As part of the deal made with PG&E in the past month, it was meant to calm, I felt it was meant to calm future volatility fears. It is tempting to want to look for ways to now continuously calm what has been a volatile energy trading market for decades, possibly. And in light of a new world economy we're possibly about to enter, if applicable, it feels to me to start a new over-reliance on long-term economic stability models at the EBCE would be giving into a system of management related to the nuclear power industry and smart technology. These groups have proven as the fossil fuel industry in the past, their good intentions are often seriously mixed with detrimental thinking, ideas, and plans. So in respecting that stable budget practices over 5 and 10 year periods always have to be developed, I hope you can continue to try to navigate the ideas of volatility in the energy sharing marketplace that has been a standard procedure for quite some time now. While sadly noting the terms volatility in the next few years will be different than in previous years, there's been a tradition that can allow the concept that allows for how to create flexibility in choices. and how I've been assuming how to introduce incredibly good, more positive, sustainable energy project models and infrastructure building in the next few years. We would all rather work with stability instead of volatility. I just worry to put more efforts towards the term stability in the next few years will allow the nuclear power industry and smart technology industry a much more stronger foothold than they deserve or need. As I've tried to state earlier during the public meeting, by working towards these good practices, which should be the ideals of the EBCE and local community energy at this time, it's positive, sustainable energy ideas that can assure that we are working towards good practices of our collective future we all know, care about, and want. And by the allocation process next year, there can be a clear understanding for all of us that want to practice our good, positive, sustainable energy ideals and infrastructure, and can make for a good map and we're to be sure we're on the good path. To offer a few more statements, I hope we can redefine terms positive sustainability at this time. And I hope that we work to keep prices of inflation down and use the term deflationary. And even though the idea of raising prices does have its place sometimes in our lives. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Blair. Jessica? Is Jessica unmuted?
Okay, there, I think you can hear me now.
Yes.
Okay,
Yes, we can. Thank you.
I guess my comment is, I noticed that there is an item on the board agenda for Wednesday. And maybe it's not on the agenda as an item, but in one of the earlier items that has to do with sponsorship and the ability to grant sponsorships up to $100,000. And I'm wondering if why the Community Advisory Committee wouldn't be considering talking about that. I think that's a pretty significant ability to be able to give up to $100,000 in a sponsorship without having to go through the board or the Community Advisory Committee. So I think that's something that perhaps should be considered. That, and then I guess the other thing I want to add is I think before COVID hit, we were also looking at potentially hearing about recruitment for the Community Advisory Committee, and then that fell. I certainly because of the emergency that we were having to deal with. So those are two things I just wanted to bring up to your attention. That's it.
Okay, thank you, Jessica. I will say that the sponsorship policy was one that I actually didn't remember seeing previously. I don't know if it got added towards the end or maybe I missed it before, but we also knew that this meeting was going to be, it's a consent item for the board, and we were going to be having a lot to talk about with the budget. So that's one reason perhaps why we didn't have it on tonight's meeting. Who's our third speaker again? Please remind me, Adrian.
Alita Dupree is unmuted.
Okay, go ahead, Alita.
All right. Thank you, Chair Sutter. Alita Dupree for the record. Let the record reflect that my pronouns are she and her. It's good to be here. I'm getting more involved in the work of these meetings, and I thank you. I followed the work of this agency in earnest, and I remember when I arrived in Oakland on May 31, 2018 at about 9:30 at night. I woke up in the morning in my hotel on June 1 of 2018, knowing that East Bay Community Energy had gone live. And being that a hotel is a commercial facility, I was excited because even though my room didn't look or feel any different, I knew that I was part of something bigger than myself. And so the work of this agency has really been legendary, and it only took 2 years to get it running. And so public powers is something that's very near and dear to me. And I appreciate all of the good reports that I get in your agendas. Thank you for the transparency. So I talked to you tonight in my chance to engage with you as citizens. Not that the elected officials are any less, but that there are some other perspectives that we can learn and that we all are in this together. The brand of EBCE is very, very important to me, and I believe very much in the importance of renewables. And, you know, there is a demographic that I run into in the world that often says, why should I pay more for something, for the same thing, when I can get it for less somewhere else? And so that's why I feel very strongly that in our economy class, to make sure as best we can to stay less than PG&E, because there are many who are price sensitive, and I want them to stay with East Bay Community Energy and to continue to pay into this public enterprise, which by virtue of holding public meetings, people like myself can engage. And so I want us to be focused as much as we can on purchasing more renewables. And I'm willing to pay for 100% renewables. Some people can't afford that. So it's very good that we have multiple classes of service. So I ask as you go forward in these various conversations to continue the work, aspirational work of purchasing cheap renewable electricity as best you can, given the constraints of the grid, so that way people will be able to know that they have a home with East Bay Community Energy. Thank you.
Thank you, Alita. Do we have any more speaker slips?
No, that's those are all the speakers.
Okay. We're going to move on to the minutes from April 20th. Does anybody, has everybody reviewed them? Does anybody have any comments? I will say I have two comments, and unfortunately our notes did not indicate who actually made motions and who seconded them, but I don't remember making a motion or seconding a motion last month. It's very possible I did, and I was going to put it out to the collective whole. Does anybody remember who made the motion to move the one item to be informational? Because I didn't think I did. But if nobody can remember, we'll just leave it at that.
Sorry, Mary.
What was the one item, Mary, that you're referring to?
It was, and I don't have it right in front of me. Let me get it. It was the first item that we took, that we had a motion for. It was power content procurement floor.
Yeah.
It's in the-
I think it might have been me who made the motion.
Pardon?
I might have been the one who made the motion. I recall.
That's, you know, I just was pretty sure it wasn't me to make a motion to, that the CEC recommend to the board to hear the power procurement floor item as an informational item. I know that we'd said it, and I might have indicated that that's what the motion would be, but I don't think I actually made the motion.
Okay. I can go and I'll correct that.
Monica popped to my mind also.
Okay, so yeah, if it could be.
I'm not certain, but I think, I'm not sure.
Okay, and then
my notes, I didn't have it either.
I won't worry about the seconding of, Cynthia made the motion for the carbon-free allocation, indicated that I seconded. I don't remember seconding it, but I very well may have. So I'm not going to worry about it at this point. Any other adjustments or changes to the minutes from last month? Can I get a motion?
Motion to approve.
With amendments?
Second.
I'll second.
Okay.
Okay, so Member French, Motion to approve, Padilla, second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any
Sorry, Chair,
opposed?
can we do a roll call vote, please?
Oh, sure.
Thank
Roll
you.
call vote, please.
Member Eldridge,
Aye.
Member French,
Aye.
Member Laundrie,
Yes.
Member O'Connell,
Yes.
Member Pacheco. Oh, sorry. Member Padilla,
Yes.
Member Thomas,
Yes.
and Chair Sutter.
Yes,
Motion passed.
thank you. We're going to move on to our next item, which is, and I have to keep going back and forth to this. It's the chair notes, and I will say I'm almost there. I should have printed it out for our agenda. Chair report. I have only one small thing to report. I had sent out an email a while back asking people thoughts for where to put masks. EBCE is putting a grant out, and they're going to support providing people to certain businesses. We didn't hear any back from anybody except Jane. So they really want our CAC input though. So you should have received an email a couple days ago from CAC, or from staff at EBCE, and it's a short survey asking your opinion in terms of where these PPEs should be provided. So I'm really hoping that as a CAC, we can get to them, provide our inputs. If you haven't found it, let me know, or actually let Baby know, and they can, I think we need to mute somebody. We need to let them know, and that you'd like to take the actual survey. That's all I had for the chair. And Olivia, your hand is up. Did you have something that you wanted to add about this?
Yes, I did. I actually was also curious about the item that Jessica brought up. I understand that they're eager for our information on where we should donate PPE, but I really feel like when you go to the meeting on Wednesday, you should request that this item be pulled from the consent agenda. It is very common to do so, and at least bring a discussion on $100,000 is an awful lot of money to be able to give to a Little League sponsorship without bringing it back to the board, considering our new budget and the fiscal restraints. So I really appreciate them wanting us to weigh in on PPE. I feel like a dollar amount allocation of that size should also be coming to us, especially in this time. So that would be my feedback.
Okay. Moving on to item C5, then we've got the EBCE draft 2020-21 budget. We have an hour and a half allocated to this. What I would like to do is actually let Nick, or I'm assuming it's Nick, going to present on this and have us hold our questions until the end. It is a long slide deck, so you might want to write down your questions so we can ask them all at the end of the presentation. Nick?
Yep,
Are
great.
you presenting on this?
Yes. Adrian, will you pull up the slides? Or Stephanie?
I'm pulling up the slides now. Hold on one second. Okay. Okay, do you see this? Do you see the slides?
I do.
Yes, okay, great.
Okay. All right, well, so we are, as mentioned, this is our draft 2020-2021 budget. We did first present this last week to the Finance and Administration Committee. So there actually have already been a few fairly minor modifications made in response to some of the feedback we got last week. All right, next slide, first slide, second slide. Oh, next slide. Okay. One second here. Cool. Okay, so I think at a high level, what's I think worth focusing on is what we've been talking about for 6 months or more. We are now finally, in the context of our budget, seeing, which is a very significant reduction in revenues, largely driven by the significantly rising power charge and difference adjustment, and increasingly by COVID-related effects. In all, we are projecting almost $100 million reduction in revenue relative to last year's forecast. When we think about the PCIA, I think some of the underlying assumptions that we talked a little bit more about, we've been talking about for some time. Actually, I'll get to that when we get to the revenue specific slide. We have included a pretty significant allowance for uncollectibles, which I'll touch on, which I think is probably the most significant COVID-related effect that we're seeing here. But there are some offsetting benefits on energy costs. The drivers of these energy costs are driven by a number of effects, from some of the procurement policy changes that we've made in the last month to softening energy prices. From an overhead perspective, what you're seeing is a slight reduction in overall overhead, where we are really working hard to make sure that we're maintaining the same level of local development. We actually are proposing a slight increase to our local development, but making significant cuts in all other operating areas, but save for personnel, which these personnel costs largely reflect the fact that we are largely achieved our steady state staffing levels. And so our previous year represented kind of partial accrual of our steady state staffing costs. I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about interest payments right here. So next slide, please. Now, this is our comparison of our budget to actuals. These actuals do only represent 9 months of unaudited results. Q4 still are projections, so are subject to change. I think the key points to highlight here are we already are seeing some of the reductions in revenue that are coming from the PCIA and COVID. On May 1st, we implemented the first phase of the increases in the PCIA. So May and June are both seeing market reductions in expected revenue as a result of that increase in the PCIA. We also are observing reductions in usage related to COVID that we'll speak to a little bit later. Next slide. So as I mentioned, and as we've really talked about for quite some time, we are forecasting a almost $96 million reduction in revenue relative to what our expectation was last year. Some of the operating assumptions here are we're seeing kind of a partial increase in the PCIA for the first half of the year, and then a really significant increase in the PCIA for the second half of the year. This has to do with this concept of the PCIA trigger versus the cap. We are also assuming that the 2021 PCIA doesn't go into effect until really the end of this fiscal year, beginning of the next fiscal year, which is largely in line with what we've been observing the last couple of years. If you recall, last year, the new PCIA didn't go into effect until July. This year, it was May 1st. Given those uncertainties, we felt it was cleanest from a budget planning perspective to integrate sort of the PCIA values that we know. And I will say we're taking a pretty conservative view of what will happen in the PCIA. We are assuming we have to pay the full PCIA balance down to the 7% under collection. We are modeling a modest increase in general PCIA PG&E generation rates with an additional increase that would come in January 2021. This is important because it does play some role in offsetting the PCIA increases effect on our headroom relative to PG&E. I think the most important thing to highlight in our estimation of our revenue base case is a 0.5% reduction in the Bright Choice discount. We are presenting kind of that here as the base case, recognizing that we are endeavoring in our base case to deliver a balanced budget, which we have done. And we are also, in our base case, integrating an increase in the Brilliant 100 costs from parity with PG&E to a 3% premium. That 3% premium is meant to reflect the fact that we have experienced Brilliant 100 being roughly 4% more expensive than Bright Choice from a procurement perspective. So edging Brilliant 100 up to 3% is meant to ensure that we're able to recover the costs associated with serving customers at that carbon-free energy level, not to generate excess margin to do other things. It kind of reflects what we believe is the cost of service for Brilliant 100. Cumulatively, these two changes do increase revenue by $5.7 million, which plays a not insignificant role in helping to balance our budget. We are seeing a modest increase in our investment income. This largely has to do with the fact that we've generated significant free cash in the last fiscal year, and those funds are sitting in an interest-bearing account. And then finally, I think while we have talked about the load impacts in previous meetings of COVID, from a financial perspective, we are not speculating significantly in our base case about the load reductions associated with COVID, because what we are seeing is largely a dollar for dollar offset. As you see a reduction in consumption, you're seeing a dollar for dollar offset in costs. So if you do experience, say, a 3 or 5% reduction in consumption, that is bearing out as a dollar for dollar reduction in our procurement expense. So given the uncertain nature of the load changes, we actually did not, in our base case, account for that effect, because we didn't expect it to have a meaningful financial impact. Where we are likely to expect a meaningful financial consequence, though, is in our uncollectibles. So typically, we have forecast 0.5% uncollectible. These are funds that we are never able to collect from customers, and eventually we write off. Our research into past economic crises has demonstrated sort of a fairly wide range of expected uncollectibles, from 1% all the way up, and in one case to 6% uncollectibles that lead to write-offs. So we felt that an increase in 5x from our base case of 0.5 to 2.5% represented a fairly conservative view of what we might think, what we might see as uncollectibles for the year. And I'll note that we do expect delayed payments to be higher than 2.5%. This 2.5% really reflects what we are not able to collect from a customer over the course of that 12 months, over the course of these 12 months. Next slide, please. Now, from an energy cost perspective, as I mentioned, we are forecasting lower energy costs. This current or coming fiscal year forecast does represent both what we've already purchased and what we're forecasting the cost to buy on the open market to be. The significant reduction relative to the last fiscal year is largely reflective of sort of two dynamics. One is energy prices have gone down over the last number of months, largely due to significant reductions in demand for oil and gas. The price of natural gas has significantly fallen in the last 2 to 3 months. That has had a knock-on effect for the price of electricity. We've also, after changing our procurement policies and no longer going out to procure incremental large hydro, are forecasting cost reductions. In sum, that is what largely makes up the almost $37 million. Roughly a third of which is represented by the reduced costs associated with not buying large hydro. 2/3 is represented by sort of the shift in commodity and our open position times these reduced prices. So one thing we are also forecasting as a cost increase is our cost of data management. So our contract with SMUD runs through the end of this calendar year. And we're currently in the process of reviewing contract extension options with SMUD. And while we expect to be able to come back with a good market rate for an extension with SMUD, if we're not able to, or based on a number of circumstances, it is possible that our data management and customer service costs will rise this fiscal year if we end up with a shorter term contract, or we end up potentially even having to switch providers. Those two will force us to incur some incremental costs. So we're taking a conservative view of what could happen with our data management costs, and putting in a placeholder of $1.20 a meter a month for the second half of the fiscal year. And then finally, scheduling. That is the service that the Northern California Power Agency provides to us. That $7,000 increase represents just sort of the normal, very modest increase that we have built into our contract. And then, yes, I'm sorry. And then there's finally the PG&E fees. Those are fees that are set by the California Public Utilities Commission that we're required to pay on a per meter per month basis. So this represents the fact that we are gaining a small number of meters over time. So next slide, please. The next item is our personnel costs. And so this is our first major area of our overhead operations. Is that Jason? Adrian, I think you jumped a slide. No, is that right? No, I'm sorry. You're right. That's good. So these are our first major category in overhead. So if you recall, last fiscal year, we had 37 positions approved in the budget. We currently have 31 FTE and 2 interns. So for this next fiscal year, we are planning to continue to hire to our approved staffing level, 37 staff. A number of these positions have offers out, and there are a couple that we expect to hire in the new fiscal year, but we are proposing to maintain a flat staffing level at 37 people. We do have, that said, we do forecast an increase in personnel costs. This is largely due to the fact that our last fiscal year budget reflected a kind of an incremental sort of bringing staff on. So, we were hiring quite a bit over the last year. And so, the budget reflected there were people coming in, a third of the way, halfway, 3/4 of the way through the year. And so they're fully bundled costs for a fiscal year. We're not integrated into that budget. This fiscal year does represent sort of 37 staff for the entire fiscal year. So that's, I would say, is the single largest driver of these staffing cost increases. Next, we are proposing a policy in light of our efforts to, and some feedback we actually got from our board last week, but also just to continue to try to manage our personnel costs. Instead of implementing a cost of living adjustment this year, we instead are seeking to enact a policy to allow staff to sell up to 1 week of vacation. We're also looking to increase the amount of vacation staff have by 1 week. So it would be giving staff some incremental vacation and then allowing them, if they so choose, to monetize that if they want to, and if they do not, they can keep it as paid time off. We are proposing a 2.5% merit-based adjustment. So this would be a bonus pool that would be allocated to staff based on performance between 1% to 5%. It would be allocated effectively, across a bell curve. So with the most staff experiencing a 2%, 3%, or 4%, a very small percent of the staff experiencing a 1%, and a very small percent of the staff experiencing a 5% bonus. And then finally, we are including a 3% allocation for sort of discretionary promotion and retention-based costs. So, to the degree that we have staff who are doing a great job and they're ready to be promoted to the next level, we want to make sure that we've accounted for that in our budget, that we can support that. And then, if there are sort of unexpected retention-based costs that we need to incur, we want to be ready to do that. Next slide, please. So what this shows, is to the point around our actuals versus our budget. I think what this shows is we have been slowly increasing our staffing levels over the course of the year, to the point where we now have actually achieved a full staffing level and kind of a steady run rate. And that actually slightly is higher than our budgeted quantity, but that was expected because we were, again, bringing people on throughout the year, and we were budgeting, recognizing that people were coming on throughout the year, and knew that that would likely result in an overall cost of personnel the following year. Next slide. So this actually slide did not make its way into the slight update. This still reflects a 2.5% cost of living adjustment. As I mentioned earlier, we have sort of shifted away from awarding a cost of living adjustment towards providing some incremental vacation, and then the ability to monetize that vacation if a staff person so chooses. So next slide, please. So next is our marketing, outreach, and communications budget. This is all things related to advertising, communications, incremental data management costs. So we have our standard, $1.05 a meter a month cost, but we also fairly consistently have found ourselves needing to implement some change orders where there's a new functionality that we're finding that we want to provide, or there's a program we're looking to implement that we want to be able to do some IT changes and be able to better market to customers. And so we're budgeting for that in this category. I think largely what we're seeing here, is a fairly aggressive reduction relative to our last budget year, and largely in line with our experience of what we actually spent last year. The major sort of changes that we are seeing are, pretty significant reduction in advertising, sponsorships, and events. Some of that is just naturally occurring because there are just many fewer events to potentially sponsor or attend. But also just reflects the fact that we are, going to really try to manage our costs much more tightly. And so while we're asking for a budget of just under 1.5 million, again, that's our ceiling, not our floor. And so I would expect that, we will work to beat that. One of the areas that we are seeing, I should say the two major, most significant areas of cost reduction are reduction in some of the community grants and then a significant reduction in mailing costs. The significant reduction in mailing costs does, though, reflect some changes that we've seen at the California Public Utilities Commission, where there's increasing allowance for use of email instead of paper mailers. Next slide. So here's our legal, policy, and regulatory affairs expense. This is a tough one when we think about cuts. If anything, your legal expenses tend to rise year over year because rates, outside legal rates, tend to be rising, not falling. That said, we're seeking to deliver some cost reductions. A big driver there is elimination of outside sponsorships and no longer funding a temp employee. That reference to temp employee, though, those expenses have been sort of taken up in personnel costs as we hired a person who was a temp employee who's now a full-time employee with EVC. Next slide, please. And then here's our general catch-all, general administrative expense. And this is all types of different things, from software licenses to use of cloud computing, our Cal CCA membership dues, our office rent, and conferences and professional development, one area where we expect to see some not insignificant reduction in overall expense. Next slide, please. Oh, go back to that slide. Just one thing I'll note. We are pursuing a number of fairly high cost initiatives, or one-time high cost, but potentially very valuable initiatives. I think one example is our energy prepay. This is a structure whereby a CCA can leverage its tax-exempt government agency status to create potentially several $1 million a year in energy cost savings through a structured financial transaction. But there are legal expenses that you have to incur to structure the transaction, and there's also potentially a joint powers authority that may need to be formed between East Bay and a couple other CCAs to manage the transaction. And so I think that's just worth highlighting in our operational expenses, that that's one of the reasons why we're not seeing a reduction there, is because it's sort of this one-time, potentially very beneficial transaction type. Next slide, please. Now our local development spend. Let's see. JP, do you want to jump in here and kind of walk us through?
Sure, happy to walk folks through where we are. Sorry, just took a bite of dinner. Apologies for that. So the proposed local development budget, as Nick said, is a slight increase in local development spend this year to $6.5 million. So that's the kind of the first subheading up there. we've also been asked to kind of account for staffing costs as we're hiring folks onto the team. So we've accounted for staffing costs and are planning to bring on a fellow to help with some of our program implementation work this year. But note that those dollars don't actually come from the local development, business department. Those are really HR costs, so are not pulled from the local development budget per se, but noted as requested by some board members. And then we also have some funding that we are pursuing, which is another budget item on this meeting, which is for the California Energy Commission's electric vehicle incentive program. So you'll hear more about that in a little bit when Jesse talks about it. But our goal there is for EBCE over the course of 4 years to be investing $16 million in electric vehicle charging infrastructure. And we are hopeful and pretty optimistic about the Energy Commission providing matching dollars at least. So targeting more than 16 million from the California Energy Commission, but quite exciting to kind of be a finalist for that incentive program and to drive a significant amount of investment into Alameda County for vehicle electrification, which has a lot of benefits that we'll go into later. So as we look at the different program areas, we have some demand response, efficiency, investing quite a bit in electrification, both building and vehicle, and then also collaborative procurement. So we talk more about those subject areas as we go, but obviously there's a very significant amount of investment in vehicle electrification, and that is really because we're able to leverage so much external dollars from the California Energy Commission. We really feel like it's worth making that investment from EBCE's local development funds, because we're able to bring in that external money, and that 4 million in CEC grant dollars is kind of the direct investment that we would expect from the Energy Commission, and there will be more indirect investment through that program, since there will be some costs covered by site hosts as we're developing the electric vehicle charging infrastructure. So there'll even be kind of more indirect dollars brought into Alameda County through that program, which obviously quite consistent with kind of all of our programs where we are trying to leverage both direct and indirect investment. So next slide, we can start talking about the details of some of these program areas. So as discussed, the Transportation Electrification Fund is a substantial one. So we had the EVIP incentives, as well as some administrative and overhead costs for the Center for Sustainable Energy, CSE. And again, Jesse will talk more about those two, so I'll leave those two for the time being. We also want to be investing in kind of filling the funnel, if you will, of sites where EBCE wants to be developing EV charging infrastructure, and we'll talk more about that as well when Jesse discusses the EVIP, but some exciting moves there for how we can kind of really direct and get EV charging infrastructure installed and deployed across our community to really help everybody who lives in Alameda County. We also have some funding for municipal fleet electrification. So there's quite a few bus fleets and school district fleets, as well as city fleets, that are continuing to plan on how to electrify their fleets. And we've already started working with some of our cities on fleet electrification support to help them plan that out. And we want to continue to do that. And also focusing on medium and heavy duty, which is such a key component to reducing air quality impacts across our communities, and focusing on that sector for electrification. A lot of the focus to date has been on light duty, and we want to make sure that that heavy duty diesel vehicles are also getting electrified as we progress with this portfolio of programs. Next slide. So building electrification and demand response. So building electrification is quite important as we move to get gas, natural gas, or unnatural gas as it may be, out of buildings and convert to electric homes, which are much cheaper or much greener to operate. And so we have already made an investment in heat pump hot water heaters through Stop Waste this year, and we plan to extend that into next year. We've also made really good headway with our REACH code program. We have, I think, 8 cities now who are in the process of passing REACH codes. And so we want to continue supporting the implementation of those REACH codes so that they land well. Building inspectors are trained up and contractors are trained up. So we'll be working with the coalitions to provide that support. We have some commercial induction kitchen grants for electrifying commercial kitchens, as well as investing in our partners like the Building Decarbonization Coalition to work on raising awareness about electrification and the benefits of electrifications on indoor air quality and clean homes. And we also want to continue our work with demand response. So how we can ensure that these new electric loads that are built out don't contribute to our peak and the peak energy costs, which are, you know, afternoon peaks tend to be the most expensive and also potentially the dirtiest. So managing demand response through managing electrification with demand response to mitigate those impacts is something we'll be investing in. Next slide, please. So we have quite a bit on collaborative procurement. So we have our solar and storage resilience program, as well as, which we'll be launching this year, working on connected communities. So we have quite a bit of work on investing on our customers who are or have in the past been disconnected through lack of payment. And that's not happening right now in COVID, but it's still very much a challenge for customers. And so we want to make sure that we are meeting customers where they're at, especially our customers who are having trouble paying their bills. So we're kicking off work to do that. And that also includes our Disadvantaged Communities Green Tariff program, which will provide a 20% discount to care customers living in disadvantaged communities as part of that initiative. We're also going to be working on how to kind of get into the space of developing and potentially owning and operating renewable and electrified assets. So part of our electric vehicle incentive program investment will be owning and operating some EV chargers. And we're also evaluating solar and storage and ownership potential, and also thinking about building electrification and how we can assist our customers in accelerating electrification through making that process easier by financing and then potentially owning and operating those assets. And working and continuing on kind of electrifying with renewables our municipal city infrastructure. So again, that's buildings and vehicles. For energy efficiency, this budget had kind of been lower in the early year. The first year we had $100,000 in here, and we invested that in Recurve to kind of build out a data analysis tool for targeting energy efficiency procurements, and we are planning on launching up some pay for performance procurements with some budget that we have in the 2019 fiscal year, or sorry, 2020. And we want to continue to invest more in pay for performance and delivering energy efficiency opportunities to our customers. So that's something that we are going to be investing in, as well as sharing data with existing energy efficiency implementers and administrators. We've been doing with organizations like Stop Waste. And we are also putting some money into planning to pursue public energy efficiency funding through the PUC. So there are ratepayer collected dollars for energy efficiency that right now are administered by the IOUs, by PG&E, and some of our CCA cohorts, counterparties have gone after public efficiency dollars through the Public Utilities Commission to run and administer their own programs. And so Becky is evaluating how EBCE can do that and increase our budget for efficiency using those dollars that are already collected from our customers, so that that money doesn't come from our operating revenues. Next slide, please. So that's what we have for the local development update on the budget.
Great, thank you, JP. So from that exciting, interesting topic to interest due and interest expenses, we are projecting just over $800,000 in interest expense. This is largely driven by the undrawn commitment fee on our facility. So because we have a $60 million $60 million sort of cash draw capacity, we do pay 1% undrawn. So that's 600,000. And we do have outstanding letters of credit that do have a 1.75% credit cost to them. So, you know, for the next fiscal year, our projections at least are that, you know, the two primary drivers of these expenses are going to be the undrawn commitment fee and then the costs of our letters of credit. Next slide. Okay. You know, one thing you'll note here is that we have not included in our base case the integration of our three new communities, Newark, Pleasanton, and Tracy. And that's not because we're not expecting to integrate them, but it's because the board has not yet formally approved an integration timeline. And as you can imagine, the timeline to bring those communities on, you know, will significantly impact the budget. There's procurement expense. There's also customer revenues. So for the purposes of this base case, we decided to break out new communities as a standalone line item to point to and really focus on what are the margins associated with bringing these customers on next year. In our base case, we did select April as the time to integrate the three communities. That's based on really sort of two primary drivers. One is April is when you start to see winter rates roll off towards summer rates. I believe it's May 1st is when summer rates start, and that's actually changed a little bit now that our spring rates. But the point being, April and May is when you start to see kind of the uptick in customer revenues throughout the year. And then it's the sort of the winter months, November, December, January, February, March, April is when you see lower revenues. So bringing them on in April is beneficial from a run rate perspective. April and May in particular tend to be very low cost energy periods as well. So we viewed this as sort of a very tactical time to bring these customers in when we can generate significant positive margins to get them integrated well into the program. You know, one thing you'll note here is we did not include or allocate most general overhead to the three new communities. Largely that's because we don't expect to need to, say, hire new staff or spend significant legal time on the integration. That work has largely been done already. So we're treating a lot of those overhead expenses as fixed expense, and so we're really only applying the variable expense associated with the integration of the new communities. Largely, that's marketing, outreach, and communication costs, having to do with outreach events, customer mailers, and the like. There's also a data management expense. Obviously, as we're bringing new customers on, we're going to have to pay our data management vendor for billing costs. So all in all, we are projecting for the last 3 months, of the fiscal year, almost 3.5 million in positive margin contribution from the integration of these new communities. From a timing perspective, we do expect to bring, probably in the June-July timeframe, a decision item for the board to just determine exactly when to integrate these new communities, whether that's April or a different time frame. Next slide, please. Did we skip one right there? No, let me just. Yeah. Thank you. So this is no. From a reserve and net position standpoint, we do expect to, in this fiscal year, fund our reserve space with free cash flow that we've generated from this past fiscal year. And that will likely, occur after our formal audit is completed in November and December. This, if you recall, is sort of these are our different reserve categories, though. Next slide, please. So here is a comparison. This is a bit of an eye chart here, but I think what we're trying to illustrate here is that EDCE overhead continues to reflect, on average, a smaller total cost smaller percentage cost than for our cohort of comparable CCAs by a fairly small percentage, 1.4%. But really, I think what's most significant here is that we're very much in line with other CCAs when we think about how much we spend on programs, on legal costs, on employment, etc. Next slide, please. This is a kind of a further illustration of the last slide, but in a probably easier to read format. Again, I think what you find here is that we're very in line with our competitive set. If anything, we're a little bit below the average employment costs, and and total overhead, and in line with our expenses for energy programs. I think one thing that is not always captured, though, in our energy programs is we are investing in local renewables. We have a local wind project, local energy storage, and those aren't necessarily captured as energy program expense. They're captured in our energy expense, but they reflect, I think, what is a very significant investment in Alameda County by EVCE. Next slide. Here is a comparison of our products to the sort of our current view of being able to kind of say what other CCAs are charging. What you'll see is our 1% discount proposal generally remains in line with what other CCAs are offering. So if you look at MCE, they're currently offering sort of between 0 and 2%. they have a slightly different value proposition for different communities. So some of their newer communities have lesser discounts. Some of the older communities have higher discounts. Sonoma Clean Power is now offering their customers their base Clean Start product at a premium to PG&E. That premium is in the 2 to 4% range, while San Jose is offering an 1% discount. Monterey Bay is offering a 7% discount, but is deferring some customer payments. So they're reducing their discount to 2% for the rest of the year. And actually starting next year, they're going to be moving to cost of service-based rates. So they're not going to be indexing off of PG&E. And then PCE, I understand, is continuing to offer 5%. So I think that 1% kind of fits generally kind of in line with what we're continuing to see from CCAs. Next slide. So now, I think I've walked through the staff recommendations, but I'll maybe reiterate here. The staff recommendation, kind of as we start the discussion is, in an effort to ensure that we are offering a balanced budget in light of significant reductions in revenue and much higher than previously seen uncollectibles, we are proposing to reduce our discount from 1.5% to 1%. We are proposing to move Brilliant 100 to a cost basis, which would result in a premium of 3% to PG&E. We are proposing to maintain Renewable 100 unchanged at a 1 cent premium to PG&E, which also, from our perspective, is reflective of the cost basis of that product. And with these changes, we're forecasting $5.4 million in bill savings to our customers. One thing to note here, though, is if you change the discount further, it does increase or potentially decrease revenue. Each 0.5% is equal to roughly $2.7 million. It is also true that you can generate more revenue by increasing Brilliant 100 above the 3%. Though I think generally speaking, the staff view is that 3% premium reflects the cost of Brilliant 100. So at this time, we're not recommending going beyond that as a measure to increase revenue. Next slide, please. This year in particular, I think, is one where we're facing more risks than normal. And so we're going to kind of walk through what some of those key risk factors are. Part of the challenge with these risks also is it's hard to extrapolate or forecast them because some of them are so new in nature. So next slide, please. As I mentioned, we're not including in the base case, a reduction in revenue associated with COVID, while we have actually seen some volumetric reduction in load. That is largely because we think, or at least we've experienced so far, and we're forecasting that there's no meaningful impact on margin. So that those reductions in load, yes, they reduce revenue, but they also reduce costs, in step with the reductions in revenue. That being said, the load decreases could have, or the load changes that could have a number of interesting effects. So, one of those effects is sort of this moderate load decrease, which what I would say sort of what we're observing today, which is roughly a 6 to 8% reduction, but a much larger reduction in peak energy usage. Part of the reason why the 6 to 8% volumetric reduction is cost neutral is because most of that reduction is happening during the peak, which is when energy costs are highest. One interesting potential outcome here is a load increase. So that load increase would be one where we start to see businesses open, yet many customers remain sheltered in place, working from home. And so, as we get into the summer months, you have a lot more daytime home air conditioner usage, but, you have, manufacturing, light commercial, commercial industrial opening up. So you kind of have the double whammy of two classes that are using a lot during the peak time. Whereas typically when people are working, they're not running their air conditioning at home. And then there is, obviously the risk that some of these reductions that we are forecasting that are near term are sustained over the long term. 6-10% long-term load reduction and 10 to 15% long-term peak reduction. One of the, I think, our primary strategies to deal with that potentiality is to work to maintain, 10% or so of our energy position open. So we're not hedging ourselves 100%. That allows us to benefit from reduced costs if load doesn't come back quickly. Next slide, please. One of the other effects that we're seeing here, and so far to some degree, has been a benefit to us because it's reduced energy costs, is increased volatility in. I'm sorry. Did we get? We did this one already. Got it. Okay, I'm sorry. I moved on to the energy market risks. So this is fine, Adrian. COVID and load continued. So for some of these, these ongoing volumetric changes do have the potential to reduce margins, and so I think we're continuing to be very watchful of. Does the sustained reduction in energy consumption start not correlating with our cost reductions? And that is a risk factor that I think could further exacerbate our somewhat challenging revenue situation, one where we're seeing revenues drop more than we're seeing our costs drop. Next slide, please. This is the point I was making about sort of energy cost volatility. We have seen significant volatility in, oh, nope, let's go back. Thank you. We have seen significant, nope, I'm back, nope, there you go, stop, nope. There we go. Energy market risk. Let's stay there. Generally we see sort of that 10 to 20% volatility in price, heavily influenced by things like weather. But with COVID, we've seen more volatility driven by macro factors like the cratering of world oil prices, which has in turn significantly reduced natural gas prices, which in turn is lowering electricity prices. These reductions can deliver meaningful cost savings, as I kind of alluded to, kind of about 60-65% of our overall energy cost reductions are resulted in these sort of macro factors trickling down to reduce forward energy prices. The challenge being that can whipsaw quickly. And the way you hedge, you protect yourself is by hedging against that volatility. The challenge with hedging in this environment with low prices is if you over hedge and you see more load reduction or you see more sustained load reduction, that over hedge could find that you're sort of on the wrong side of a trade, and you are seeing actually significantly higher costs because you overbought, you don't have the revenue, and then the market is trading below where you bought, and so you have liability. Next slide, please. Let's fee, is that right? Energy market risk, uncollectibles, please, one back, please. And as I mentioned, we are forecasting a 2.5% uncollectible rate for this year. I don't think that you can say that there's no right number here. I think that's just a kind of a middle value that we think represents significant increase, but certainly is not the worst case scenario. We're monitoring this very closely though, and so we have not yet sort of seen a trend that suggests we'll get to 2.5%. We have been talking to a lot of other CCAs though, and there's some that are looking at 1.5, there's some that are looking at higher than 2.5. One of the steps that we are taking to mitigate these risks though is we've been running a very active campaign to encourage customers who are having a hard time paying their bills to consider enrolling for the CARE discount. One of the things that has happened recently is the CARE program has been open to customers who have recently lost their jobs or been furloughed. And so we've been running a multi-channel marketing campaign to share that information, and including doing outbound calling from our call center to customers who are behind on their bills. We still don't have the results yet of those calls, but if it turns out to be successful, we will very likely aggressively pursue more of that sort of outbound outreach to customers. I think another point to make here on these uncollectibles, and just generally against all these risks is, EVC has over the last 2 years built a very strong financial position with robust reserves, and so those are really good to have during this potentially challenging time. Next slide, please. No, one back. I think this sort of doesn't need to really be added on too much. Obviously, customer opt-outs continue to be a major risk factor. The key mitigating step here really is to maintain a value proposition where we are less expensive than PG&E. I think that's our single most significant mitigating strategy. Also continuing to offer customer programs and demonstrate our value to the community through the grants that we've been making, through investing in local clean energy, and making sure we're communicating that. Next slide. Next, okay. One of the things we've built in here is, I think, a fairly conservative view of the potential range of outcomes related to the PCIA trigger. We are assuming that there's a $16 million deferral in some of those accrued PCIA costs because there is an allowance for maintenance of a 7% under collection. So there is a risk that we are required to, in addition to what we're already forecasting is an additional $16 million in PCIA costs that could come due. Again, I think we feel fairly strongly that that's a low likelihood, so we didn't build it into our base case. Another regulatory risk we continue to face has to do with AB 1110. That's the new power content reporting guidelines. So over the last year or two, the California Energy Commission has been working to change the way load serving entities have to report the power they buy and move towards much more granular reporting of sources and emissions of sources. One of the main challenges we faced here is they only finalized the regulations the end of last year, but they are going to be applying those regulations retroactively. So procurements that were made at any time in 2019 are going to be subject to the new AB 1110 power content requirements, even though those requirements were largely unknown until the end of the year. Those regulations, will affect the way things like RECs are unbundled PCC. The RECs are reported and their value is counting towards renewables. They also will change the way ACS hydro is reported. And so again, they likely will reduce some of the value of ACS hydro because of the reporting of even very small amounts of fossil or nuclear that may be in the ACS. As two examples of kind of how ACS reporting has changed. Previously, ACS was reported as unspecified, and as a buyer of ACS, you were not able to actually determine what the underlying percentages would necessarily be. So I think that's one of the particularly challenging things we're seeing with 1110 is that you might have entered into an ACS contract expecting it to report with a total emissions factor and unspecified, and now you have the same emissions factor, but you have it broken out in ways that you could not have foreseen when you entered into the transaction. And then finally, working group 3, this is the allocation of the utility resources. And this is where, you know, the future allocation of large hydro, the future allocation of nuclear, and the allocation of renewables will occur. There's still, you know, a lot of potential ways this allocation could occur that could be financially beneficial or could be financially detrimental, depending on how things shake out. Next slide. So, you know, with all those risk factors that we're facing, you know, there are further mitigating strategies. So, you know, as we've laid out, while our base case suggests reduction of our discount from 1.5% to 1%, we could continue to reduce our discount and achieve additional cost savings. There is the potential to also increase the Brilliant 100 premium, though, again, I think that's something that is of likely limited value. Given one, you know, it's likely at a certain point not reflective cost, and then two, at a certain price point, we would expect customers to opt down out of Brilliant 100. So, you know, a large opt down from Brilliant 100 would offset, you know, the cost savings there. One other mitigant strategy that we're currently looking to is, now that our Bright Choice power content is being compared to PG&E on the basis of renewables only, and whatever large hydro we're allocated, we do have some excess large hydro that we may be able to monetize, depending on market conditions. And then finally, while EBC has elected not to take the allocation of nuclear in 2020, there are other LSEs that have elected to take it. If one of those LSEs were to come to us and request to buy it off of us, there might be an opportunity to monetize the nuclear allocation while not having it count towards our power content. And then in 2021, there will be an opportunity to revisit whether or not to take an allocation. And at that time, again, there'll be an opportunity to determine whether or not it makes sense to sell to another LSE as opposed to letting PG&E keep it. Next slide, last slide. All right. So, we presented our base case. And we haven't asked for some alternative scenarios. So with the goal of really trying to maintain a balanced budget, which is what our base case has done, these alternatives really sort of reflect different ways of slicing and dicing the budget to continue to achieve that balanced budget. So one alternative could be keep your discount at 1.5% and find a 2.5% cost savings in the local development budget. A second alternative could be you could increase your local development budget from 6.5 to almost a little over $9 million, and then you could further decrease your Bright Choice discount from 1.5 down to 0.5%. And then the final alternative is to reduce your discount to 0.5%. So you realize an additional $2.7 million in cost savings while not funding other parts of the budget, and just basically trying to generate a little bit of incremental free cash to further mitigate the risks from the energy market, COBA, COVID-19, recessionary effects, the PUBA under collection, and potentially even contribute incrementally to reserves. So that is it.
Great, thank you, Nick. Long presentation. So I'm sure we're going to have questions and things for Nick. I would like to go first to the public and have any comments on this particular item. Adrian, I see 2 hands raised, 3 hands raised. Audrey was first, and then Barbara, and then Blair. At this point, I don't remember if they actually have to sign a speaker slip for this.
I see that Audrey is on the speaker list first, so I'll go ahead and unmute her.
Great, thank you. Audrey? Adrian, let us know when she's unmuted.
I'm trying to unmute her. The unmute button is not responding.
Unmute now. Can you hear me?
Now we can. Thank you, Audrey.
Oh, great. Okay. It's really wonderful to be able to comment and to follow all of these proceedings. I also attended the finance procurement subcommittee meeting, and that was very enlightening too. It's really gratifying to see how this community energy works as opposed to a corporate entity like PG&E. So thanks very much. I had a couple of questions regarding number 5, the net position and reserve policy. One is quite straightforward. What does the target column refer to? Please remind me or us. And then with respect to the value proposition regarding Brilliant 100, why do you, what was the thinking behind keeping Renewable 100 unchanged? And I see from Nick's presentation that it's a definite benefit to get to a cost-based rate, energy rates for the customers. And why, and I see that, and if it's good, why cannot the cost-based rate go down as maybe energy prices, especially for renewables, continues to decline? So, and would that not be a great incentive for people to enroll in the hope of making a difference and profiting from that potential? Why is it, I guess, is my question about keeping, doing nothing about Renewable 100? Thank you.
Thank you, Audrey. Nick, can you respond to what the target column stands for and why the unchanged Renewable 100?
So just the target is slide 21. So the target that reflects the total values that the board approved in our reserve policy as the targets we wanted to achieve for each of the reserve fund categories.
Over time.
Over time, that's the end, that's the goal quantity.
Yep.
So the second question about Renewable 100, yes, I think it is possible that in the future, it may make sense to offer Renewable 100 at a lower cost relative to where it is right now. And so that's certainly something that we'll continue to evaluate. I think at this time, we feel Renewable 100 largely reflects the cost of service. And because it's an optional rate where customers can opt down, we didn't see there really being much financial value to the agency of raising the rate above the cost of service, because we would expect some amount of opting out to offset any of the financial benefit that we might incur.
Thank you, Nick. So Adrian, do we have Barbara next, and then Blair? Do we have speaker slips in for them?
Yes, we have a speaker slip for Blair and Barbara. I'm going to unmute Barbara.
Thank you. Barbara, we can't hear you yet. Can you say something?
While I try to unmute her, I'm going to unmute Blair instead.
Okay.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Thank you, Blair.
Thank you. To try to finish my speech from my first speech tonight, my first words. I feel we have to define the term positive sustainability first at this time, as this can show us how to go forward into a shared future in healing terms more easily. To also note, I am on the side to always try to keep ideas of inflation down. For energy trading to work as a deflationary tool in the next year could set a good standard and decency that would naturally bring relief and respect. Even as I can understand the raising of prices can have its place. I'm new to the community energy process, but I'm really hopeful and excited about what it can accomplish. I've seen a little bit of work in San Jose, where I'm from, over the past few years with community energy. I came to my own conclusions that by 2023, we could have a very good sustainable energy models in place. And despite the COVID situation at this time, it only being 2020, I can still see those good practices in place by 23. It really requires us to really want to put our efforts towards positive sustainability issues. And, you know, the ideas that, you know, smart technology and this upcoming item on, you know, driverless cars and that whole bit, it has to be put into a special little corner. And we have to really more focus upon the ideas, I feel, of what can be positive sustainability and energy. And I don't know exactly what that means. I'm young and inexperienced, but I want to have the energy to try to ask that of ourselves and to look for those options. So I wish you, to all the speakers who've already spoken today, they were great to hear. I mean, they've spoken exactly what I've been trying to say myself. I've been writing a few letters now in my first days here. It's really explaining to me what I've been trying to understand in San Jose. And so this is a good new experience for me. And I'm really hopeful that, you know, we can really set a positive, good course. To quickly add, how much time do I have left?
28 seconds.
20 seconds, okay, thank you. I work on accountability with the future of technology for a local community. And that's issues that is incredibly positive. And I've been so hopeful about that I'm raring to go how that can transfer into, you know, better democratic practices for local energy. And so I'm hopeful. And so I hope you can be prepared for my inexperience and hopefulness. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Blair. Barbara, are you able to?
Yes, I am. Thank you.
Thank you.
My
We can hear you.
froze right as I was being unmuted, so I don't know what happened. I'll start with a couple quick questions. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, great. Okay. So I guess I wanted to know whether or not the budget numbers include, we recently heard that PG&E was likely to actually implement a 1% increase in rates, and I was wondering if that was reflected in those numbers. I also wanted more information about the uncollectibles, like what you're seeing in terms of people not able to pay bills and what you anticipate as we move forward into this unknown future. I think you really should rethink this notion of monetizing the vacation. I think that everyone needs vacation. What you'll find is that people who have lower salaries but may very well have greater need will feel this pressure to actually make money by selling off vacation time, and it will create a real haves and have-nots problem within the staff. The 70% for the electric vehicle program in the LDBP, I think is not sustainable in the time that we're moving into, where California might very well have a 25% unemployment rate. We are going to see a huge increase in the number of people who cannot pay their rent, cannot pay their utility bills. And we need to be actually addressing those issues. And especially in local development, we also have a wildfire season coming up. And so far as we know, there will be power outages. We need to be creating local resilience here, especially in most impacted communities, because those communities are going to be the hardest hit by all of the repercussions of a global pandemic at the same time. So I really want us to rethink the $4 million, over $4 million that we're investing in electric vehicles. I do think the East Bay Clean Power Alliance supports all the fleet electrification money that's spent, and I realize that electric charging may bring in some income, but it's 70% of the local development business plan, and that's really painful. And that's not even, you know, if there are anticipated cuts in the local development business plan, that could be an even greater percentage. So it just, I think the staff really needs to wrap their head around what this future is going to look like. And it's really going to be hard on those who don't have a lot of material resources. Okay, I think that's it.
Thank you, Barbara. Hey, Nick, can you real quickly indicate to Barbara if those budget numbers included the 1% implementation of PG&E's rate increase? I thought I heard you said that it did, but maybe
Yes,
I
it
missed
does.
Okay, great. So Jessica's hand is raised. Adrian, has she got a speaker slip in?
I have unmuted her, but we should fill out speaker slips when we can.
Okay, so Jessica, please go ahead and then fill out a speaker slip when you're done.
Oh, no, it's okay. I was trying to communicate Barbara's weird situation.
Oh, okay.
Sorry about that. I should put it down.
No problem. All right, what I'd like to do then is move, seeing no other raised hands, I'm assuming.
Oh, we do have one other speaker. Alita Dupree is on the speaker list.
Ah, okay, I just didn't see a raised hand. Alita, please go ahead.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
We sure can.
Okay, yes, and I did do the speaker slip, so
Yep.
I'm still learning this process. So I think we have some good things here. This budget has some aspirational elements to it, and it's very important for us to look forward. Transportation electrification is really important, especially with the zero emission mandate for public transit buses. Many of these buses have very large kilowatt hour packs. So that's going to be lots of kilowatt hours that we can get into. And so it's important that we invest in transport electrification, and more cars are going to become electric. I would like all cars to be electric and be like cell phones. Commercial electrification with kitchens and induction is very important. I have induction in my all-electric home, and I am living proof that it is possible to cook great food in an all-electric kitchen. So it's important that we educate our restaurant and food service industries on that. Demand response is very important. I am a practitioner of time of use in my own home, and it saves me substantial amounts of money. as I've known for many years, that purchasing electricity at peak is very expensive, and one can see that if they pull up the Cal ISO price map and all little colored dots and bars on it. It makes some very interesting viewing. And so I appreciate the aspirational aspects of this. As far as the possibility of monetizing a nuclear allocation, I'm in the neutral on it. If we can do that without putting the brand at risk, I'd be okay with it, as long as it is in conformance with the decision at the last board meeting to be non-nuclear. I think certainly the matter is deserving of study and discussion, and should not be dismissed out of hand. So there are a lot of good elements. I think our big opportunities are in transport and heating and cooking. BART is an all-electric railway, as is probably the biggest example, the legendary and historic New York City subway, which runs on publicly generated electricity. Again, it's very important to keep the price points as such to at least have our economy classes less than PG&E, so that we don't have defections. I want to keep this organization growing. Thank you.
Thank you, Elena. Adrian, is that it?
Yes, that is.
Okay, great. Thank you. I'm going to move over to the panelist side now. Remember, folks, this is an informational item only for EBCE. The vote will be in June. I see Monica with a hand up. Monica?
Yep, I'm here.
Yep. Did you have your hand up?
I did. I thought
Go for it.
we were supposed to do, but I had a couple of questions for Nick. First of all, thank you. That was a very long presentation, but a lot of information. You said a couple of times that the impacts of COVID-19 are somewhat negligible on account of the revenue is not going down that dramatically